Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. We are live.
Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers.
I am Caitlin Miller.
We are both licensed therapists.
But this is not therapy for so many reasons.
So
many reasons.
This is just an open conversation. The two of us are here every Monday, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, to talk about whatever. And we will talk about whatever we will talk about, which is influenced by the fact that we are on a live stream, right? Like, we take into account the fact that theoretically this is for people to watch as an audience.
Other humans.
And we do our best to think about what people might be interested in and phrase things in a way that will be interpreted by you all. And that goes even better if we have more information about you. And the one way we can get more information about you is through our chat. So
we love your comments.
For those of you who participate in the chat, we thank you. That does help us to be more dialed in.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if anyone has noticed, but you and I both have a tendency to get into philosophy when we talk with one another.
Yeah.
Which I love, and perhaps viewers do too, but it's helpful to us.
My first girl will be named Sophia, so I'm just practicing.
You'll theoretically have someone else involved in the naming process. I selected, when I was a teenager, I had 3 names for 3 boys selected.
What were they?
I have 3 boys, and none of them are boys.
Oh my gosh.
They were
so
silly
much
names.
Compromise.
They weren't really names that I...
Sophia's like the namesake of everything. It's just, it couldn't be more perfect.
It was more jokes, although I do think some of the names are kind of cool.
I don't know, some of your kids' names are like kind of,
Well,
not like
my kids'
jokey,
names.
but like really cute.
Miles, Augie, and Rex are our
Yeah.
children's names. I think they're all great.
And they're all so cute. Oh my gosh.
I am a word nerd, and so, knowing what they mean and...
You're a word.
Oh, that was a portmanteau. You did a portmanteau of word nerd.
You're
and
a
it still comes out as just
W-E-R-D.
word.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. They're all
Anyway.
Latin-based roots. Anyway. Yeah, we're here just talking about whatever, and that includes those of you who are in the chat. Hi, Dad. Good to be with you.
Hello.
Whatever you want to put out there, we'll go wherever. It's like any conversation.
Yeah.
When people pay attention to one another, then the things that they do impact one another. So what we say impacts what I say impacts what you'll say next. What you all say impacts what we'll say.
We're a part of a group therapy practice
Yes,
in Northbrook, Illinois, which is a perfect town.
Well, I don't know about that, but it's a nice one. Yes, we do individual, couples, and family therapy in the state of Illinois. We also work with a couple brilliant executive functioning coaches who can work with people all over the world via the internet.
And they're now doing, or at least they have done 2 live streams, Sarah and Marie.
Yes, and that might be, I have not heard officially about, but it might be a regular weekly thing. We'll keep you updated, but pay attention to, you want to hear the 3 names? Dash, Link, and Ender were the 3 names that I always said.
That sounds like a kid who's playing a lot of video games.
First of all, none of those are video. Well, okay, the second one's a video game reference. They're also all going to be nicknames. Lincoln was the name.
Oh, you were destined to move to Illinois.
Sure.
Sorry, my brain is like zip, 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 zip.
The land of Lincoln.
Today.
Well, not to get too much into my family's personal business, but I, in my adult years, became aware of a brother that I had not been previously aware of, and it turns out that his oldest son is named Lincoln, so that was taken off the table for me.
That's so cute.
Anyway, but Dash, if anything, is from a movie. It's not really from The Incredibles. That's just where most people know about it. Okay, now that I think about it, that one is a video game reference too, from a Star Wars video game. But Ender is from a book. Anyway. Oh, yeah, so we'll keep you updated, but thus far they've been doing co-working streams, kind of like a version of body doubling, but with some structure to it and some suggestions and support.
And our
on
coaches
Thursdays.
can work with anyone, anywhere in the world. So.
Not Ender, as in Ender's Game, which was one of my favorite books when I was younger.
And then also these streams are saved or whatever, so your comments.
Yeah, they become VODs, videos on demand. So
and in 6
they're
months
accessible on
they're
YouTube.
going viral. So that's my plan.
I think that's enough. I don't remember what all we said or didn't say, but good
I
enough.
think we checked most of the boxes.
Cool. How are you? What's been on your mind lately?
Focusing on positive things and leaning into really enjoying my life, and it's working. It's really nice.
So you are enjoying your life more as you work on these things?
I am feeling enjoyment more in my life, but my life has not really, if someone was watching a movie of my life, it hasn't changed much over the past month, but it's more of like
the external conditions.
Yeah, the external conditions are almost exactly the same. However, the internal conditions are becoming
And you're enjoying it more.
Joyful, yeah.
You're enjoying your life. That's great. Good for you.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
It is. It's so nice.
Awesome.
Enjoyment is contagious. It seems to be.
I think that's true. I think all human emotion is contagious.
Mm-hmm.
Ideas on how to teach good and evil metaphors through a D&D game. I'm very interested in this topic, but I'm not exactly sure what you mean.
Is your dad playing D&D?
My dad has played D&D with me at various points. Like when I first played when I was 12, he was involved. But also
you were an OG D&Der?
Yeah.
Well, it was a long time ago for you.
Yeah, I've been playing. I first started playing. This is like braggadocious in certain circles.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to like be like, I've been around or whatever.
That's why I called you the OG.
But I've been playing since what at the time was called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's now generally referred to as 2nd edition, and it's on 5th edition. I started playing in like the late 90s.
Wow.
Late 99, which at the time felt, the game was first developed in the 70s. So that felt like I was a young newbie or whatever.
Oh, wow.
But it's also had a huge explosion in popularity over the last 5 to 10 years. So, yep, THAC0. I did THAC0 back in the day. I believe you're being serious. I'm not exactly sure what you mean, teaching good and evil metaphors. What do you mean about like teaching good and evil?
I think he's being serious too.
Yeah. Creating a game that has an intention. An intention to teach something. To teach what?
A lesson around good and evil?
Well, he says creating a game that has an intention, and I'm asking what intention specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Because that'd be great to talk about. Although my first thoughts, where choices lead. Interesting. Sorry, last week I engaged in something I do every once in a while where I'll go back and listen. I record conversations that I have sometimes, and I'll go back and listen as a way of, like an athlete watching tape of their games, seeing what they're doing, what they can improve on or whatever. And so I'm trying to change some of my communication patterns. That's why I hesitated there. I would argue that a well-run, I also say that unless I'm talking about something specifically related to D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, we're just using that as a shorthand for TTRPGs, tabletop role-playing games, generally. the genre.
Mm-hmm.
But I would argue that a well-run and enjoyable game requires that people be able to see where their choices lead. There's a term, railroading, that gets used in other contexts as well, but not completely free form. I think a DM has no end in mind. It's more about playing for fun. But what if the DM attempts to be a teacher? So honestly, what's coming up over and over when you're asking this is actually theater related. Do you know much about Brecht? I know that
I feel like I've heard it.
because he
I
did
think I've
opera
heard
stuff
it.
too. Bertolt
They
Brecht.
never did acting classes.
Well, I'm saying he wrote some operas.
Oh, I thought you were talking about an acting theory. No.
Bertolt Brecht was a playwright.
Mm.
And his big thing that he is known for, although as I find is often the case with famous people from the past, towards the end of his career, disagreed with a lot of the things that he is still remembered for, like as an example of. But the thing that he's generally remembered for is talking about theater, the experience of theater as like an instructive event. That the role of or the goal of a play is to teach the audience something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm going with when you're asking about what if the person who's creating the story for people is attempting to teach something. That's what comes up for me.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking right now?
I'm thinking, where is Brandon going? Is he going to move to the end of the career, which is whatever the other thing the playwright thought, and how is it going to go from the audience is learning something?
What are you interested in?
What's the end of his career? How did his philosophy change? And how does it relate to your philosophy around teaching in a
TTRPG, tabletop role-playing game.
Yes.
And towards the end of his career, he was critical of this earlier stuff where he was approaching theater as though it was basically a sermon, right? That you're lecturing the audience, that you're intending for them to walk away with a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that he's mostly remembered for, partly because theater students have to learn the word and it's a memorable word, is Befremdungseffekt, which is German for the alienation effect. That he was big on not allowing the audience to suspend their disbelief, which is generally suspension of disbelief is generally something in media, whether it's theater or TV, whatever. Mm-hmm. You want the audience to forget about the fact that they're observing a piece of art.
Yeah.
That they don't approach it as, well, this is all fake, it's a TV show. You want them to engage with it as though they're observing real events, even though they know that it's not. So his thought was, no, we don't want that. We want people to remember that this is just a show, that it's created with a purpose, that this is not reality that they're observing. Mm-hmm. And that became a very popular thing amongst the design of shows. You know, things like lighting rigs being visible on stage, or accompaniment being played on stage, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the cast is playing the piano rather than down in the orchestra pit.
Yeah.
For a young men's activity. I want to play D&D allowing for choice but aimed at making it thought-provoking. Okay, that's helpful. That clarifies some stuff. But essentially, Brecht towards the end was saying you can't do that, right? You can attempt to do that, but what each audience member experiences is what they experience, and what they take away is what they take away. Mm-hmm. You can't approach it through the lens of trying to get them to take a certain thing away, because that turns it into a lecture that's received as a lecture or a sermon or whatever is received, where people are then kind of the way that they teach English or teach reading in American high schools, where it's like the author has a secret point that they've coded into this book and your job is to figure it out, which ruins the enjoyment of it for most people.
Yeah.
Code words like young men's activity. Young men's my parents are Mormon. I grew up Mormon, and young men's activity, what he's referring to is like once a week, you get together with, similar in other churches, right? Like boys 12 to 14 would get together and do some kind of activity.
Yeah. Are you getting stuck because a sermon and teaching something is not inherent in a D&D game? So the question is impossible to answer?
No, it's...
Oh, okay.
I just wasn't sure quite what he was getting at, and now I have more clarity. So I was just sharing what was in my mind, and now it's on a different thing.
Yeah.
And trying to be more thoughtful about where to start. How do we use it for therapy? So I have been in and out of the process of designing a therapeutic approach centered around a tabletop role-playing game.
Mm-hmm.
Effectively, what we're talking about is like any other version of role-play.
Mm-hmm.
That what we're attempting to do is to allow people to explore things in a consequence-free environment.
Yeah.
Trying not to be so whatever. I'm going to stop. What we're talking about is catharsis.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you're familiar, viewers, with that phrase, but catharsis comes from Greek philosophy, and I can't remember, I believe it's Plato, but I can't remember for sure which of the big three it was. What we're talking about is feeling emotions about something as though it is directly relevant to your life, when in fact it is not actually directly relevant to your life.
Mm-hmm.
That theoretically there is benefit to the experiencing of even very painful or unpleasant emotions when they are not attached to actual things making your life worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a lot of the theory around different versions of art or other kinds of experiences where, like, you go on a roller coaster and you feel really scared even though you're safe. You watch a movie and you feel terribly sad when a character dies, even though it's all made up and it's not a real person in your life. Sports, to me, a huge, huge part of the role that sports play in our culture is catharsis for masculine identified people. You are allowed to get...
That is so helpful for me to have so much more compassion. Thank you, Brandon.
There are many rules around masculinity in our culture.
Yeah.
And the expression of emotion is one of those things that you don't
express
my heart. Intense emotion in any direction. Not just don't cry, but also like don't get super excited and eager and whatever. Mm-hmm. And sports is a realm where all that is allowed. You can get exuberant and excited and scream at the top of your lungs, and you can get angry and curse, and you can get sad and cry. Mm-hmm. And none of it is relevant to your actual life, right? Mm-hmm. That, other than the emotional impact it has on you, because you're a fan, I'm a Bears fan, right? The fact that when they lose, I can be sad or upset about it, but it doesn't actually change the material conditions of my life. Mm-hmm. Other than that. So, any of these things where we're trying to create an experience like that is aimed at catharsis. We're attempting to give people, well, that's one of the things it's aimed at. We're attempting to give people the opportunity to feel things, to explore things emotionally, unrelated to the actual circumstances of their real life. Mm-hmm. Partly because, and I do think this tends to be more true as time goes on, like this was less true the further back in time you go. Partly because there is a belief that the way that you feel about a thing is inextricably and inevitably tied to the thing itself.
Yeah.
What?
That's so dangerous.
Meaning, if something happens in my real life, right? If if I get a speeding ticket and have to pay money for a speeding ticket that I didn't expect and it takes a hit to my finances, that has actual direct impact on the reality of my life. That money is gone now. In tandem, I'll feel, in this case, we'll say I'm pissed or angry at myself or sad or full of self-loathing for making this mistake or angry at the system, whatever. We connect those two things as though the emotion justifies, the problem justifies the emotion, and the emotion justifies the perception of the problem as being a problem. In other words, people will think that if you're calm in response to something, you don't consider that thing to be important or a problem. Like, it's almost can be portrayed as a joke in popular media of somebody dies, and if you don't cry about it, people are like, you heartless monster, you have a heart of stone, right? And that's not actually true. It is not true that the external reality, the thing that happens, and the way that it impacts you are inextricably linked. They are connected, right? It did impact you in that way. It doesn't theoretically have to impact you in that way. And so I think part of the point of cathartic experiences is to help people to learn to understand that your feelings in response to a thing happening and the material conditions of the thing that is happening are two separate things and can be addressed separately. You can cry about fake things that aren't real. Also means that you can acknowledge and understand the problems of a real actual thing that's happening and not feel terribly sad or scared or anxious about it. It's not to say you shouldn't, it's just to say that it's possible. In particular, with TTRPGs, it was Aristotle, not Plato, who originated the concept of catharsis. Yeah. Thank you. In particular, emotional experiences around failure. So when we're dealing with stuff in the cognitive environment, when we're thinking about stuff, and TTRPGs, along with other forms of art and other things, they're a way of collectively engaging in cognitive things that aren't real, together with other people. Link deleted. The benefit of thinking about stuff is that it is consequence free to think about possible actions. If I'm thinking, can I jump from this roof to that roof? Can I make that jump? As I think about it, I can think, no, I'll probably fall, and even imagine myself or even feel about falling and become terrified. But the point of that is that I didn't have to actually try it and actually fall and actually get hurt. So the point of these things is not to teach consequences. They're to allow people to explore the connection between actions and consequences. But you don't need to teach people that actions have consequences or they would be doing those things. So I'm guessing that you're aiming at some more specific, trying to connect, like, if you do this thing, it result, like, these things are bad things to do and they result in bad things if you do them for you. In which case you're like, that gets more into railroading, where you're intending, you're kind of forcing the story to go a certain direction in spite of whatever the players are trying to do. So theoretically, in an open world TTRPG, right, like, the point is that your characters in this world, and those characters can do anything in the world that the character could do in the world. And that includes, if you want to, like, up and travel to the other side of the world, you can do that, right? But that butts up against the reality of the person who's running the game has to do things to prepare. So if you decide to travel to the other side of the world and the DM has not even developed what exists on the other side of the world yet, that can be tricky. In review, could I ask, how did that make you feel? You can always do that, although as a general rule of thumb, I would frame that as how did you feel about that? Because it reinforces that
Oh yeah.
link that we were saying, that like a person must feel a certain way about a thing.
Mm-hmm.
When the thing happens, you will feel because you are made to feel.
Mm-hmm.
So just say, how did you feel when that happened? And it also is often helpful to separate out how did you feel when that happened and what were you thinking when that happened as two different things, to help people to explore feelings and thoughts as separate from one another. Impact each other, but different things. Yeah, the style of gameplay I like is improvisational.
Mm-hmm.
I want people to be able to do whatever. That's the other element of what a TTRPG does as opposed to long form improv, is that there are rules. So there are some constraints, right? That if one of the players says, I stand up on a table at the tavern and start singing to entertain everyone and make a lot of money, as opposed to just the DM deciding what happens next, of like, okay, well, they all boo you, or okay, you make a bunch of money, or whatever. There are rules in there, and you roll some dice to see how those things go.
Oh, interesting.
So, genuinely, I think a big part of why TTRPGs have been popular, especially lately, is because they provide some structure to group social interaction. When you say like, hey, let's all get together and hang out, these 5 friends, 6 friends that we all enjoy each other's company, let's get together and hang out. Some groups of friends are fine to just say, let's get together and we'll just literally sit there and just talk and whatever, we'll figure it out. Some people are more comfortable with like, well, what's the thing we're doing together?
Yeah.
What was a different choice you could have made? Do you wish you had made that choice? Yeah, those are good. If you're trying to teach a specific like lesson, to explore like, okay, let's go back to that scenario and think about what else could have happened or what other options were on the table. Sure. In the same way that people structure dinner parties or cocktail parties, or even just the idea of like, we're getting together to get a drink, not just we're getting together to sit around and we'll figure it out. Sorry, I keep bouncing back and forth between the comments.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about? I feel like I'm talking a lot.
I do this thing with you pretty often. I keep wondering where you're going, even though that's not a thing that seems to be useful in listening to. And then I'm trying to like track the conversation and summarize it, and getting a little bit lost, and then also getting lost in the difference between the comments and what you're saying. Not like different, but it feels like it seems like 2 different tracks.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I don't have a place that I'm going. Generally speaking, like we talked about at the beginning, I think that efficient communication doesn't involve a lot of planning ahead.
Yeah.
But like, what you say and do impacts me, and then I respond, and then we'll see what you do, and then we'll see what I do. Though I am aware of the fact that people often have this interpretation that I am trying to build up to something when I'm not. And that's part of what I'm trying to address in my communication, is the things that might be contributing to people interpreting me that way. So what are you interested in?
I'm wondering if you think it's possible to do a role-playing game where a group of young men could learn a lesson. Because it seems like the way...
Is it possible? I think it's possible, yeah.
Okay.
I think that TTRPG to me falls under the same category as performance art, like theater. I think it's difficult for many people. I think it's difficult because for many people, the primary benefit of D&D is the space it gives between their actions in real life. They're able to be more open and adventurous because they have the benefit of it being just a game. Yeah, I agree with that. That's part of what I'm saying with like things being consequence free, that there are cathartic consequences, like the potential death of your character that can make you feel certain ways, but doesn't actually impact the material conditions of your life.
Mhm.
When we explore this as a therapeutic modality, my focus is around, in a TTRPG, you create your own character.
Mhm.
So imagine like a play, but a play that is being collectively written by every person who is participating in the play, that each actor crafts their own character, a character that they want to play for various reasons. And the director slash playwright, whatever in this case, their job is to figure out a way to put bones and structure around those characters
Mhm.
to make it so that those characters are interesting.
Mhm.
Right? If someone creates a character that I don't know, would be a very boring character to see on stage as long as everything in their life is stable, then that creates a context in which the DM is most likely going to need to make it so that the events of their life are not stable.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Leaning more towards the lesson of the product of choices. That takes us into a different, or at least takes my thoughts in a different direction. Anyway, so as a therapy thing, hold on, I forgot what your question was because I got distracted by the chat. What was your question?
I think it was something about, is it possible to have a role-playing game for
Teach
young
a
men
lesson.
in which you can teach a lesson?
I think it is possible, but with all art, I think the most effective art, the stuff that creates the most powerful and lasting experiences for people, is when you don't identify the thing you are trying to get them to experience,
Mm-hmm.
but rather just craft something that you think is likely to engender an experience for a person.
Mm-hmm. How would you define something that could be likely to engender an experience? Because I feel like the definition of I'm guessing the definition of an experience would change if it's possible or not. Like if you're saying,
Think of it like if some kids are going to go outside and play.
Mm-hmm.
Think of the difference between here's an open field to play in where they can play and it can be fun and they can use their imaginations,
Mm-hmm.
versus here's a playground to play in,
Mm-hmm.
where in the playground they have opportunities to do things that are unusual. A field by definition is not very different than the
Mm-hmm.
typical experience. You're always surrounded by ground, and when you're out in open space, it's open space, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
When you have monkey bars, like that's a thing that doesn't really occur in your life that you're able to do that. When you have
Mm-hmm.
swings, that's a thing. Do you have to go on the monkey bars or do the swings? No, but there are opportunities for you to do things that might be interesting because they're novel.
How could someone learn a lesson on a playground?
So learn a lesson and teach a lesson are two different things.
Oh, okay.
And people learn best when you're not teaching a lesson, but are creating the opportunity for them to learn.
So what would an example of that be with the playground metaphor?
I'm not sure that metaphor extends in that direction.
That's where I was getting kind of lost.
You had asked about how to create something that makes it more likely to engender
experiences.
experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're creating something that is out of the ordinary, where there are many different possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And while there's always the bias of what I'm choosing to present to you as options, and the way that it's laid out is going to make it more likely that you go this way or go to that thing or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you do still have the option to do it in whatever way you choose.
Mm-hmm.
When we explore it as a therapeutic modality, specifically what we're looking at is they're creating their character. We use the word avatar sometimes for that, right?
Do they create their character before they know about the world, or do they create their character after? In the
Are you asking about
example?
In the therapeutic example?
Yeah.
They would know somewhat about the world.
Okay.
Some language that helps is fluff and mechanics, or fluff and crunch. In TTRPGs, fluff is like flavor that doesn't impact the actual rules of the game, but the story and whatever. And crunch is like the actual mechanical rules of the game. So in character creation, they're going to know some about the fluff, but only in the stuff generally that directs the crunch. Meaning,
Oh, that's really interesting.
they need to know what options they have.
Okay.
And in order to like explore what options they have to have some idea of the context, the environment. But what we would be doing is identifying characters that they're creating explicitly for two things. And this is, I think, always true in good TTRPG experiences, but we're just identifying it and being explicit. That A, the character they're creating allows them the opportunity or makes it likely that they will have opportunities to do things that they already like to do, enjoy doing, whatever.
Oh, interesting.
And B, that the character that they're creating allows them the opportunity to explore and work on things that they don't currently do a lot or feel comfortable with, but that they've identified wanting to become comfortable with. So,
cool.
And because of the nature of what this is, what we're talking about is social things, not, your character learning how to become a better fighter that does more damage isn't actually a learning experience for the player. So as an example, I like to play characters that are called the face of the party, meaning that when there's some talking to do, this is the person that steps up and does the talking. When you watch ensemble films, the leader of the team tends to be the person who's like the George Clooney in Ocean's 11, right? Like, orchestrating things. They do some stuff, but their main role is in building the team and allocating resources, coming up with the plan kind of stuff. So somebody might want to play a character that socializes because they enjoy that element of it. And they might identify that something that they want to work on is learning how to take a step back and not trying to suggest a solution to everything, letting other people explore whatever. And so we would develop a character with that in mind. And then as the DM, like face on the A-Team, I have not actually watched the A-Team, but it's quite likely that that's what the trope is named after. So I'm assuming that, he's the smooth talker guy, whatever. Then the person running the game creates opportunities for that stuff. So, and again, I think this is good TTRPG design anyway, is you find out two things. What is it that each person really enjoys and wants to have the opportunity to do? And you create that opportunity. In a good game session, I think you provide an opportunity for each player to shine in the way that they like to shine. Some people they're very focused on the mechanics and like the strategy of the game and create a really great fighter character. You want to have an opportunity for that to work out. Someone else creates a really sneaky, can break in and infiltrate and whatever, you create an opportunity for that. Somebody else is focused on social, you have an opportunity for that to save the day. And then the other is you provide opportunities for challenges, where for a person who does not like to be the one making the call, you create a situation in which they have to make the call and they don't have the other people around to be able to help them in that. Stuff like that. So it's balancing getting to do the things that you already enjoy doing and look for the opportunity against having the opportunity to challenge yourself and grow and attempt some new things.
That sounds so cool.
Generally, TTRPGs by their nature and both in the therapeutic modality are more appealing to people who don't feel as socially fluent. And do enjoy, I'm not referencing a stereotype there of nerds like TTRPGs. I'm talking about the nature of the fact that it is structured social interaction. Tends to be more appealing to people who are less comfortable with the idea of unstructured social interaction. Keep looking over to see if there's new comments. So yeah, that's the idea, is we're in the same way that in group therapy dynamics come up in the group, right? People interact with each other and things come up, conflict arises that we work through. the allowing everybody to focus on the game takes the pressure off of the interactions,
Yeah.
but it doesn't actually change the nature of the interactions. There's still going to be times where I want to do a certain thing and you want to do a different thing, and we're arguing about that. We can do it through our characters. Sometimes it's our characters are arguing. Sometimes it's out of character and we're just, you and I are talking about what we're going to do next. But either way, we're creating the opportunities for this stuff to happen. And then also, back to the playground metaphor, structuring it in a way in which it is as safe as we can make it be. Right? We're creating opportunities for things that feel a little outside of your comfort zone and feel like they might be dangerous, while designing everything around it, like the material of the ground underneath the monkey bars, to make it so that even if you do slip and fall, you're not likely to get hurt. So
is that also one of the advantageous elements of the therapeutic approach, is that there's kind of like a lack of stakes?
Well, the stakes are cathartic stakes, right? Like, yeah, that is part of it. Although, as Bast and Cider has referenced in the past, and as I was just talking about, they do bleed into real life. Like people get in fights and groups fall apart because of interpersonal dynamics. So, to me, it is a relatively unique combination of half role playing, half being yourself.
Yeah.
That is, I think, very helpful. Part of how we structure it to be safe is by having, in the way that I've designed it, that there is a therapist present for the game session, in addition to a separate person who is running the game session. So that
who's also a therapist?
No.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
That we have one person who's focused on running the game and works in collaboration with the therapist to provide the opportunities that we're looking for and structure things. But that their focus is legitimately running the game within the constraints which have been set, so that the therapist is freed up to focus on, observing, interacting with, guiding.
Would the therapist also be a player in the game?
No, although one of the things one of the tools that can be utilized is characters which exist in the game but are not played by the players are called NPCs, non-player characters. So when your character goes into the shop to buy some stuff, there's a shopkeeper and the game master plays that role. So we have it set up so that depending on what we're trying to do, there are certain roles that the therapist would play as opposed to the game master.
Cool.
Because we're trying to structure a certain thing. Therapist NPC. Yeah, that like the GM would most likely play most of the shopkeepers and like the villains and whatever.
I want to play
every
the
once in a while
oracle and
there's
the
somebody.
fairy hiding in the tree thing. When you go into the forest, there's a fairy that's gonna go. Hi.
I think you would enjoy being a player in a TTRPG game.
Yeah, big time. I was thinking about, I've been doing, I guess it would be like unofficial parts IFS work, and as you were talking, I was tracking the difference between that and TTRPG.
Yeah, that's interesting. Say more. I'm making assumptions, but
yeah, I was like, how much of it feels real, how many additional caveats there are, how much of it is catharsis, how high the stakes are. Yeah, and I feel like there's overlap in what you've described, but then some differences, because I think that there's, with parts, if the assumption is this is a part of you, I think it can feel more personal than you're playing a character, but you are also you. But then I'm like, how much different is it really? Because theoretically, if people are determining they want to be a character within a therapy setting based off of things they enjoy and then things they'd like to try to do more often that might stretch them outside of their comfort zone, but they actively want to do, then I'm like, well, how much different is that from IFS parts work, really? Because I don't know. So, and I found in sessions with clients doing kind of trying to not say it's like official because I'm not trained in IFS, but things like that, they skip a lot of caveats and it feels like it cuts to the core of things more because they're not assuming they have to be completely logical and like address every aspect of the situation before saying how they really feel, that they're like a different, I don't know. So
Yes. I'm not sure what you mean. What do you mean by caveats?
like something like, I know I don't need to be afraid of this job interview because it's a friend of a friend and they pretty much already told me I'm going to get the job anyway, but I'm still terrified and I'm terrified for these reasons. That it would just be like, I'm terrified to go into this job interview and then cutting right to that part of them versus like having to kind of show like, I know that, is that an answer to your question?
Yes. Although there's other connections I haven't followed you on or made, but sorry, Fast Insider made a joke about a villain therapist and then wrote a quote from the villain therapist. My clients keep coming in to fix exhaustion and overwhelm, but they don't understand the problem is society. So as their therapist, I will take it upon myself to fix society. Which is only a slight caricature of me.
I was gonna say, how is that a villain therapist?
Well, then theoretically they would undertake villainous actions in order to fix society.
Oh, well, who's defining villain? Can we call it divergent actions?
In TTRPGs, it tends to be relatively cut and dry.
Oh, okay.
Because TTRPGs tend to, they don't all, but they tend to involve literal, actual physical combat, like people fighting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think.
But it depends on the flavor of game that you like.
Oh my god, that's.
But it's a similar shortcut that like films will often use.
Mm-hmm.
That they, when they don't want the audience to have complicated feelings or nuanced takes on the villains, like the one that jumps out to me. I was going to ask, but I'm also assuming this is a silly question. Have you seen the movie Black Panther?
No.
The villain in that movie, his name is Killmonger.
Whoa.
But is very sympathetic in terms of his motivation. Like he is, the whole plot, his plot of the movie is effectively anger at the treatment of Black people globally. And aims at enabling Black people to fight back against their oppressors, right? Very complex and nuanced and sympathetic take. So they also make sure to have him very callously sacrifice his girlfriend's life for his own convenience in order to be like, just so that you don't end up like thinking that maybe this guy has a point.
Yeah.
And I think it is kind of a cheap writing trick because it doesn't negate the valid points that the person is making. It's just like, but also we can feel very, very settled about stopping this person because they do like things that no reasonable person would say are acceptable things to do, even if their points and thoughts are intriguing. Sorry, back to, I need to change the physical setup so I don't have to look back and forth.
Should we switch spots?
Distracts me.
Actually, switching spots might be good because I might be able to read the comments if I'm closer to the screen.
Well, we're about to wrap up, but maybe next time.
Yeah. I have it too, so I have to.
So the thing about parts work and IFS work is that you're anthropomorphizing abstract concepts in a way as a way to make them something that a person can relate with. This is something that's used in like a lot of different fields, right, where we take some abstract concept and represent it as something person-like, because then people tap into all the things they know about people and how to interact with and respond to people, and it enables them to interact with that thing much more fluently. But the whole point of parts in IFS work is that you are not dealing with other people. You're dealing with only yourself, things which you believe to be true about yourself, and then you're clothing those things in the guise of a person so that you can interact with it in that way. Whereas a TTRPG, you are actually literally interacting with actual other people.
Oh, but I'll play a different part of them. So I'm talking to them as though I'm a different part of them. But that's what.
But
is it still the same?
Right. The role you're taking on is an anthropomorphization of some part of them. In other words, where you're putting like a big blanket over the whole thing of like, this isn't actually you and I interacting. This is you interacting with a part of yourself, which is useful because it takes away a lot of the, like you're saying, I think this is the connection you were making with the caveats. That if I'm talking to my therapist, then I want to like say all these things about, I know it's ridiculous and blah, blah, blah. But if I'm talking to myself, I don't need to explain all that. I already know all that, and I can be more. But that can't happen when you're talking to actual other people, because they're actually other people and you can't really pretend that they're not. I actually think that's part of, I think there's a lot of value in parts and IFS work, and I really like Virginia Satir's parts work, like the parts parties and stuff are fascinating to me. But I do think that's one of the kind of constraints around it is you can't actually really pretend like that's not an actual, really your therapist that you're talking to. What we're doing is not removing a constraint and saying, you don't have to worry about interacting with another person. We're actually adding on top of that saying, you now have to interact with me, another person, as though I am not another person. So we're ratcheting up how much you're thinking about how other people perceive you in that kind of role play. Still very useful. I'm not saying it's not a useful thing, but I think it's helpful to acknowledge that part of it, that when you do role play, when we do role play just generally, but as therapists, that's harder for people. That's why people are so like uncomfortable with the idea of it. People don't like to do role play. It's you're doing layers and layers of picking up and interpreting social data and translating what you're doing in this really complex way.
So for people who talk more and get more emotional during role play than they do, what would you say about that?
What do you mean? Do you have a point here?
Oh, well, I'm a little lost in the sauce because I don't want to claim that I'm actually doing IFS work.
Yeah, don't worry about that part.
Okay, am I making that clear? Okay.
It sounded like your question was...
for some clients, the way they respond to role play seems similar to the way you describe a successful TTRPG therapy group.
Sure.
So when you were just saying additional constraints, and then some people don't like it because it's role play, and it's that, I guess you didn't explicitly say this, but it was implying to me that people would then take like longer to process moments, or maybe talk less on average, or feel less open.
While that can be true, for some people, they'll talk a lot more.
So I was curious, for those people, how would you describe, like, I don't know, them and why they're reacting in that way?
Well, could be a lot of specifics in different specific situations, but one like commonality we could point at is literally the exact same thing I'm talking about. Why people like TTRPGs is because by giving some additional constraints, some more things you have to pay attention to and think about, that pulls your resources away from your ability to think about these other things. And so whenever there's a person who whether difficulty with like saying a lot or expressing emotion or any other thing
Mhm.
is related to how much they are paying attention to something.
Yeah.
Whenever we split their attention off onto other things, that liberates them in a sense because they're not noticing that as much.
Mhm.
Take anyone and have them juggle and then ask them questions, and they're not censoring and editing themselves as well as they would otherwise because they're focused on something else.
Yeah, I once went to a psychodrama workshop when I was still studying, and one of the most successful psychodramatists or whatever, he was conducting it, and there was someone who was like the main person and it was her life or whatever, and I saw like the most catharsis I've ever seen. She dropped down on the ground and sobbed, and then she said afterwards, she was like, this was incredible. So I don't know.
Well, that's great, and I tried to make that clear. I'm not saying these things aren't helpful.
Oh,
I'm
no,
just
yeah,
trying to
I'm
clarify
hearing
what
that.
it is
Yeah.
that they are.
Yeah.
We're adding.
Yeah, that's adding constraints.
Well, you said like the most catharsis you've ever seen. We're talking about catharsis. People feeling emotions in response to a thing which isn't actually materially relevant to the condition of their life.
Mm-hmm.
But in the way that it impacts their emotions, it can then impact their life because how they feel changes what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of similar in ways to like how they train Navy SEALs or whatever, that if you push people to the brink, you overwhelm them, exhaust them, throw a sensory overload of information at them. Effectively, what you saw in a different context would be called a meltdown. Except that in this case, we've all identified that A, that's what we're aiming at, and therefore when it happens, we're all happy because it's a successful outcome. And B, that we're intentionally doing it and therefore all collectively identifying what it is that's happening that would cause a person to feel like that, respond like that. If you change those things, if it's in an environment in which everyone else present is unaware of what things might impact a person to feel and respond that way, and put it in an environment where that response is not what is being aimed at and is therefore considered a failure outcome, then we're talking about a meltdown. Yeah, we need to wrap up. Anyway, we got kind of inside baseball here towards the end, talking about like therapy specific
Yeah, and that's
things.
part of why I wasn't talking very much, because I kept getting stuck in my head about inside baseball stuff.
That's all right. This is what we were talking about. I like talking about
appreciate all of
TTRPGs
you.
and stuff. Yeah, good to be with you all. We'll be here again same time next week.
Yep.
Monday 1 to 2
There's
Central
a
Time.
small chance I won't be here next week.
But I will be
But
here.
you will definitely be here.
Thank
Bye,
you all.
everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.